Good afternoon, everyone. I feel like I'm getting back on my game. I actually struck the bell with the hammer this time. So gavel accuracy is getting better. I am getting a little bit of a thing. I got a thing, and I don't know how to fix that, but you know how to fix that. Welcome to the February 9th meeting of the Rotary Club of Brentwood. My name is Drew Rogers. I have the privilege of serving. Yes, thank you. Curry, I don't know, like if you don't show up one day, I'm going to be really disappointed. The whole table, I appreciate you rallying around me. I do have the privilege of serving as the president of the club this year. Glad to be here and grateful for all of you guys to be being here too. I'm calling this meeting to order, and I would like to invite Linus Sugis to come and deliver the invocation, followed by Jay Evans, who will lead us in the pledge and four-way test. Linus.
Would you all pray with me, please? Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing of this rainy day, the blessings of fellowship and a family. I'm grateful that we're able to be together and enjoy each other's company today. Father, I know that not all members of this club's extended family share my own faith tradition. I'm praying to you in a way that is familiar to me, and as I pray, I ask that you translate my words in ways that will include all of us and make our shared intentions known so that we're all drawn together more tightly. Father, I know many gathered here this afternoon are suffering silently with health or other personal needs. Please put your arms around those in need to help heal them. Today, I'm praying especially for Larry Faust, who's been struggling with back issues, but we're glad to see is here today. James Davis, and we'll also pray for David Carden's wife, who's undergoing some medical tests. Pray for the best possible outcome there. And Father, I pray that you help me and all gathered here to live up to the Rotary tradition of service above self. And it's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the four-way test, the things we think, say, and do. First. Second. Third. And fourth. And our club says, we certainly hope so.
Certainly hope so. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linus, and thank you, Jay. Jennifer Bourne, our club secretary, will introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians.
Don't put that in your mouth. All right, I'm coming here to Nick first. To introduce Pat. Okay, I'll introduce Pat.
So Jennifer's going to introduce Pat.
Hi, Pat Ryan, third visit. Thank you very much.
Pat, thank you for being here. Glad you're here.
Pat is also a former Rotarian, and he has got an application in for membership. So, okay, and then our next is right here. All right, I've got two to introduce. Robin Zimmer is back again. She was here last week with her friend Catherine, who is a Franklin Rotarian. So she's interested in potentially joining our band of misfits. So welcome to Robin.
Welcome, Robin.
And then Bob Chappett. Bob was a Rotarian in Durango, Colorado, and he and his wife have relocated to the area in the last couple of months. And so he is potentially wanting to be part of our crew as well. So welcome them both.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob.
All right, welcome. And our last guest is yours, Drew.
So, Chris, would you mind standing? Chris Dooney is a guest of mine. Chris has joined us before, but it's been a little bit. He is interested in learning more about Rotary. He lives in the Brentwood area. I've gotten to know him through another organization called the Catholic Business League. We are both Catholic. And so I'm glad that he has joined us today. And if you have a chance to introduce yourself to Chris, please do. Chris? I was commenting to Bob earlier, we're both Catholic, that Bob escaped from purgatory because there's a ski resort in Durango called Purgatory. He said, I hope to visit the ski resort Purgatory, not the place Purgatory. Okay, I do have a couple of announcements that I'd like to make before asking Michael Kaplan to lead us in Happy Bucks. As you know, RILA applications are due April 1st. There is still time to get those in. We will get those to Sheila Cleveland, and then they will get escalated from there. But I did have Roger Greenup reach out to me, and I gave him the application, so you should be getting one there. But if you know of anyone that is a rising sophomore or junior that would be a good candidate for Rotary Youth Leadership Academy, please get those applications to Sheila Cleveland. Next week, we will not be here, Alan. Next week, we will not be here. Okay, I'll say it a third time in just a little bit. We have an offsite meeting next week at Nissan Stadium, where we've had a number of members, Burt Bradford, Michelle LaFollette, Rod Freeman, and I'm sure I'm missing others. Jason Hulse has helped with the money side of this. Burt Nihill is going to be our featured speaker, and there's been no shortage of Titans news for him to share. But so we've got, head coach change, new stadium, I don't know, player personnel. There's a whole lot going on. You got a new head coach and Callahan, but we will be at Nissan Stadium for lunch next week, the regularly scheduled time, but we will be in the Wesley Mortgage Club level. And there will be more instructions that come to you. You will get the same RSVP that you've gotten for your club meeting. Please RSVP, but it will contain instructions on where to go, where to park, and all those sorts of things. So yes, Sheila. No, that we would like for you to invite guests. We feel like this is a great opportunity for people to get to know us. And Robin Zimmer came back, so we obviously did something right at this table here last week. So, so we would love for guests to join us next week. Again, Alan, Nissan Stadium next week, not Martinson. Okay. We have a lot to be happy about. We had an amazing Little Harpeth River cleanup led by our fearless leader, Patrick Wright. Well done. He actually entrusted me to lead section 2, and I think I've got all of I've stopped bleeding from the briar patch that you stuck me in. And so I really appreciated that, Patrick, but it was, I know you did it because you trusted me. But I would like to ask Michael Kaplan to lead us in Happy Bucks. Michael.
Do you have any money for your happiness you just gave me?
No, I don't.
We'll start with a good one. Can you tell us how much it is, please?
That's $5. Thank you. Thank you. Part of that's for Lori. So anyway, Red Solo Cup, rest in peace, Tubby Keith. And since you were really big on having singing when you were the president, I want you to lead everybody in Red Solo Cup. That's a group. Just started.
Thank you.
I'm happy. My daughter wanted to go to Vanderbilt and she got the acceptance. So I am happy. Thank you. I'm happy she's staying in town. That's what I want.
Amen.
That was another $5 for those scoring at home.
I could say something about the basketball game Saturday, but I won't say anything about the basketball game Saturday. We beat Alabama by 18 points, right? You each got 2 emails, I believe, this morning regarding save the date for the golf tournament. And you probably went, I can't open this thing. Well, the first one you couldn't open because the system messed it up. The second one you can open. At the top, it says, click on this to see pictures. If you click on that, you'll see this picture of our save the date, September the 9th. Okay. Now, here's the great side. Here's what my happy bucks are for. I sent this same thing out yesterday to our players and captains from last year's tournament. And 15 minutes later, I had our first $1,500 sponsorship signed up from a guy who sent me a text and said, great tournament. I'm in, go ahead and sign me up. So we're off to a great start in one day. I love it. Thank you.
Who's next? No, nobody happy at this table? What's that? Anybody?
Coming over here.
You guys will wait till I cross the room to give you some money.
You're missing people.
All right, I'm throwing a few bucks in. First of all, I need to confess something. The first time I wore this sweater, I started itching on my shoulder. I was like, what is going on? I wore it backwards. The buttons are supposed to be in the back. The first time I wore it, the buttons were in the front, and that's not where they were supposed to be. So if you're concerned, this is the right way to wear the sweater. I am giving a shameless plug about the musical coming up at Brentwood High, Beauty and the Beast. It is Miss Moody's last program. She is retiring. She's the one who her husband passed away on Christmas morning. He was a teacher at the high school as well. But she's retiring. It's her last program. We would love for you to support that. And if you're interested in buying an ad in the program, please come see me. They're not super expensive. I would just love the support for these kiddos to get all the stuff for their program. I'm also working with the Brentwood High baseball team. We're selling outfield signs right now, and they're enormous. And if you'd like to get your business on the outfield, we would love for you to come find me after. Thanks.
Who's next? Another 5. We're on fire today.
What I've experienced is working with I have a baby last fall, had all kinds of back issues, and the end result could have been not so good, but it turned out very well. I'm pain-free, and I'm just doing physical therapy right now. Should be a normal person. Thanks, Doc. Well, as a matter of fact, my surgeon did say I had loose screws back there. My friend's been telling me that all the time. But anyway, thanks to those of you that sent me an email, a text, or just whatever. Such a so important period of time. Thanks to everybody. Missed you all.
Thank you, Mayor.
I borrow some of that.
There's $5. Bankers never have any cash, right? My
Right.
bankers agree to that. We never have cash. I told Drew or asked Drew if I could make my thank yous to the club during Happy Bucks. So there's $5. I'm not sure how many years I've kind of been the guinea pig for this thing, but I know at least 5 years. So I think I've covered that. So thank you. Just thank for those of you that were there early, for those of you that came and saw the craziness that had never been a part of it before, for the veterans, for those of you that led a section on Saturday. Thanks be to God, we had a beautiful day. Thankfully, it's not tomorrow. Who knows? But let me just give you a perspective for what we did as a club this year. 257 people that I know of, that I can quantify that were there. Now that may be a few more. When I stood up at 8:45 in that chair that my wife dog whistled to me to get up there and do, I turned around. That room was full, and I had 40 people, 40 scouts and their leaders who were already on the river over at Wildwood and the Arboretum, because they know what they're doing. They like to get out early, and I'm never going to get in the way of that. So, and that room was still full. So for those of you that were there that showed up and just said, hey, what can I do? And I said, hey, you want to lead a section? And after we got the smelling salts out and got you back off the floor, you went out and did it. And it was the epitome of service above self. And you walk up to me and say, hey, what do I do? A couple of you just wanted to watch. I said, watch what's going on. And let's talk about how can we do this better. So we collected 152 bags of trash that weighed 852 pounds, a tire that weighed 30 pounds that we were able to recycle, and 300 pounds of scrap metal that was able to be recycled, 1,150 pounds plus that we pulled out of the river. Now in 23, we actually collected more, 1,350 pounds or something like that, but we didn't clean it in 22. We had to cancel it, if you remembered. We never canceled during COVID, but we did have to cancel in 22. So anyway, I can't say thank you enough to all of you. It was a great event. Had a perfect day. I look forward to working with the team that's going to come on board, committee that we're going to pull together, helping continue to make this better. started thinking about things, and I did a Larry Kane. Larry's always challenging us. 100's good, but 120 is better. 120 is great, but 140 is better. And as a banker and being, type A, I think this thing can get big. I really do. I mean, the Carpet Conservancy wants to come on board. They had 20 people there. They led a section. They want to come on board. They've got all kinds of. I talked to Jennifer Stanley at Keep Williamson Beautiful. She has a contact for every school in Williamson County who does environmental related things. We haven't nearly tapped that resource. So this thing has the opportunity to grow. But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart for all your support.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Patrick.
I can't think of a better way to close out Happy Bucks than that. So thank you very much, Patrick. Michael, well done.
Then you put your money in.
No, I don't have to do that. That's presidential privilege. Thank you.
Yes, Michael, I think you are single-handedly responsible for raising all that money today. So well done. I'm going to ask Bert Bradford to join me at the podium and introduce our distinguished speaker. Bert.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, our speaker is David Holmes, PhD. He is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Lipscomb University. David is a native of Los Angeles. He taught at Pepperdine University, Seaver College for over 25 years. He was the first African-American to receive tenure in 2003 and the rank of full professor in 2008 in the Humanities Division. David also led several administrative roles, including the Associate Dean for Curriculum and General Education. During his time at Seaver College, David was invited to two distinguished academic posts, visiting associate professor of rhetoric and composition at Arizona State University, and Langston Hughes visiting professor at the University of Kansas. We know that February is Black History Month, and this is dumb luck, but his topic today is Patriotic Paradox, the Black Soldier in the Age of Discrimination. Would you welcome Dr. Holmes, please?
Well, thank you for your welcome. I wasn't going to start off with a joke because my jokes are usually very corny and often not connected to whatever my topic would be. And then I noticed that you guys really obviously love each other. You're having fun and you're corny in your own right. So I just want to say about the remarks I'm going to make, they're going to be more of an overview. And this is where it gets really corny. In the words of the late Elizabeth Taylor, as she said to her ninth husband, "I won't hold you long." And obviously that was much funnier in my head than it's actually is. I appreciate this opportunity so very much. I could already see that you are selfless people, other-centered kind of people. And it reminds me, of course, of a poem that you probably know, and I'll only quote a part of it from John Donne. "No man is an island entire unto himself. Every man is a piece of the continent." And then he goes on to say, "Any man's death diminishes me, for I'm involved with mankind. So not therefore to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." And as I think about this topic of the paradox of the African-American soldier, I think a whole lot about how it is about, of course, race, but it's much bigger than just race. I honestly believe that as we look at the soldiers, even the brief overview we will do, African-American soldiers, Black American soldiers, what we will notice about them is that they are individuals who can provide for us a case study, a cautionary tale, if you will, about how someone could disagree and be disappointed in our great country and yet still love it and be loyal to it. It's a case study for us in that, and it's also a study for us to understand that it is possible, given the core of our great documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, to work through any problem we've had. And I don't think there's ever been a time when that lesson needs to come to us. The lesson that comes to us from them is that there are core values in our country that are worth working our way through our problems for. So I'd like you to go to the next slide, if you will. And so what I want you to notice on this slide is the Black American soldier represents for me a sort of three-legged stool. Why a three-legged stool? Of course, you know why a three-legged stool. If one of these legs is gone, then it falls. And I honestly believe that not only as we talk about the African-American soldier, but indeed as we talk about African-American history, indeed as we talk about any history where folks feel like they're marginalized, listen, according to race, religion, or region, we must look at these three stool legs. The first has to do with achievement, the second advocacy, and the third I split between allegiance and affiliation. So when we talk about the African American soldier, we have to talk about achievements. Whether we're talking about the achievements of the collective African American experience in the Revolutionary War, talking about the Rhode Island, 1st Rhode Island Regiment during the Revolutionary War, whether we're talking about going to the 54th Massachusetts during the Civil War, whether we're talking about the 369th Regiment during World War I, ended up in France. I guess I can say this here. They were called Harlem Hellfighters. Can I say that here? Harlem Hellfighters. Harlem Hellfighters, whether you're talking about them or whether you're going to World War II. And of course, talking about the great soldiers there that served with General Patton as the 1st Tank Brigade. There is the individual achievement also, not just the group achievement. There's individuals going back to before the Revolutionary War when we talk about the Boston Massacre and of course Crispus Attucks. We go to surprisingly, maybe not so surprisingly, the Civil War and think of great individuals like Frederick Douglass's son. As you remember, Frederick Douglass was that great Black abolitionist who was an escaped enslaved person who later on became a great opponent, obviously, to slavery. But what other people often miss, and particularly in our culture today about someone like Frederick Douglass, is his ability to look into the Constitution and critique what he saw was being done wrong and misapplied. In other words, when he started as the abolitionist, someone like Frederick Douglass would actually be inclined to reject the Constitution because of white abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, who believed that the Constitution, listen to the next phrase, was inherently evil. Douglass would come to reject that. Douglass, despite the 3/5 clause, if you don't know what that is, we can talk about it later. Despite the 3/5 clause, Douglass says the Constitution in its original intent is anti-slavery. So Douglass gives this great speech in 1852 about the 4th of July and how the 4th of July represents these great principles and how the Constitution represents the great principles. And the problem is not with those principles. The problem is not with the promise. The problem is in the failure to apply that promise. Is it any wonder then that we would see Douglass's son, Lewis, be a part of that great group, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, Union Regiment, who marched up to Fort Wagner and lost many, many people, including their general. And he survived. So there are many, many achievements we could talk about. We could talk about the achievements in the 20th century of the first Black American general, Benjamin Davis, 1940. There are many, many wonderful achievements to talk about. But you can't just talk about achievements, right? That's only one leg of the stool. You also have to talk about advocacy. The idea that they were mistreated. There's an interesting pattern that forms, whether you're talking about the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, or World War I, and even to some degree in Vietnam, but it was started to get reconciled then. And that is the idea that Black soldiers were meant to do grunt work, that they were meant to be stevedores, and they should not have weapons, and they weren't sophisticated enough to be officers. And time again, African-American soldiers would prove that that was not the case. I mean, think about the sophistication of the Tuskegee Airmen. who started off with bad planes, actually secondhand planes, who started out working harder than any of the other pilots, and yet they came to be known as the Red Tail. Think again about what I alluded to earlier about the Harlem Hellfighters. During World War I, when they went to France, the Germans were very afraid of these Black soldiers. Indeed, they should have been. But there was one who was on the German front during that war, a fellow by the name of Johnson, Henry Johnson. Some people called him Hank Johnson. And he was in a foxhole with one other soldier. And the Germans were attacking, and he ran out of bullets. His comrade was shot, and somehow he took his empty rifle and a knife, and some scholars will say he took out between 15 to 20 Germans, because they could tell by the many German bodies that lay before the group that came to save him the next day. So there is this sense of that, but I think that the challenge is always thinking about how do you continue to serve a country during this time where there is a challenge of achievement and the need for advocacy. And then, of course, I think about the saddest incidents for advocacy. I think about during the Civil War, because if in fact the Revolutionary War gave us our identity, then the Civil War would define our community, would it not? In this sense of community and the leadership of Abraham Lincoln. So I think about, for example, the fact that you already know this, many of you know this better than I, that during the Civil War, an African-American soldier would make $10 a month, and they would have to pay $3 from that to get their uniforms, while a white soldier would make $13 a month and an extra $3 for the uniforms. It goes on and on and on. But the question is not just about the leg of achievement and advocacy, but it's also about affiliation and allegiance. How do you continue to trust in the promise of America as an African-American soldier, whether it's the Revolutionary War or even going to other wars? How do you continue to hold on to those promises? So I'm going to give you two quick frames, and then I want to take some questions. The first frame has to do with what I call the bookends of Black prophetic discourse. Now, there's a lot of thinkers I could think of in these terms, but one bookend would, of course, be Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist. We already talked about how he believed that the Constitution was inherently anti-slavery. But then, of course, the other bookend we don't see in the 19th century, we see in the 20th century with Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass, of course, 19th century, 20th century, we see with Martin Luther King. And remember what Martin Luther King said in his I Have a Dream speech. He says that this nation will one day rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. Isn't that powerful? You know, you can't make lemonade without lemons. That's sort of obvious. And somebody's thinking, it took you to get a PhD to figure that out? What I'm suggesting from that is that if those founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights did not have the potential for liberation beyond their moment, then they would not be great documents. The challenge in our society, whether we are talking about censorship culture on the one hand, where people don't want to read certain books because they think they're too woke, or someone who has the cancel culture on the other hand, where you don't want to read a book that offends you because it's too traditional. What both of those extremes seem to forget is what we see in our founding documents. And that's the potential for a country to be better than it has been. That is the difference between understanding something that is great, like our country and our documents, and something that is perfect. Last time I checked, and can I wax a little theologically here? Last time I checked, the perfection comes in heaven. The perfection comes in the afterworld. It is not here. And as long as we are here, we are perfecting ourselves and we are not perfect. But then the last thing, very quickly, I'd like to talk about a person who embodies all of these sort of affiliation and allegiance is my father. Because you have to understand, I think you get this. African Americans, particularly in World War II and in the Korean War and in the Vietnam War, were challenged to reject allegiance to America because of the racism that was going on. In Japan, it was Tokyo Rose radio station that tried to say, why are you Negro back then, Negro Americans fighting for a country that discriminates against you? And Vietnam, it was a radio station in Hanoi that would say, while you are fighting for freedom, there's racism going on in marches. But you know, they never took the bait. My father never took the bait, because in our founding documents is the potential for not only a great country, but a great sense of community. So let me begin to wrap up by talking about my father. My father was born in 1922 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He was the first in his family to attend college, but before he attended college, he served in the Army. Is the Army hoorah? I always forget which one is hoorah. I forget which one the Marines are, but the Marines are hoorah. So Dad would be very disappointed. But so Dad served during World War II in the South Pacific. He came back to Louisiana, and he considered himself blessed because there were some soldiers, Black soldiers, who came back who had become uppity, and some of them were brutalized. Unfortunately, a few even killed. My father considered himself fortunate because the only thing that happened to him, he was in his early 20s, a couple of 14-year-old white kids threw pebbles at him. But then my father was able to leave and go to UCLA, but he never lost faith in this country. My dad died very young by today's standards, Bert, 1988. He was 66 years old in 1988. And to this day, I don't remember knowing what my father's political party was. Because one week he would be critiquing the Democrats for something stupid. The next week he would be critiquing the Republicans for what he considered a stupid idea. But no matter how dumb the idea was, Dad still maintained the capacity to embrace individuals who were different. I think what has been lost in the story of the Black soldiers illustrates this. I think what has been lost in our culture and in our country is a loss of a sense of context. That's what history gives us. A loss of a sense of compassion, and most importantly, as I'm talking about with affiliation and allegiance, a loss of a sense of community, of individual community and national community. And I appreciate the legacy of the Black American soldier who had never lost that sense of national community and community at the local level. And I want to say that I appreciate you all so much for that. The other thing I have to say, last thing I want to say about my father, and we can open up for questions for a few minutes, is my dad. I was afraid of my dad. Yeah, you know, and I have 5 siblings, and even when I got older, had my own job and my own money, I was afraid of my dad. And so I never will forget, I guess it was about 10 years or so before he died, one of my siblings, certainly not me, because like I said, I was afraid of my dad, came up to my dad and said, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you fought for a country that mistreated you before you went into the Army and then would mistreat you after. I mean, I thought my father was going to throw a fit or something. But he just smiled and he said, you don't get it. Those of us who fought during World War II, we weren't fighting for what America was. We were fighting for what America could be. And more than anything else, right, left politically, black, white, racially, north, east, west, south, regionally, I want us to trust again in the possibility of America being better than it is right now. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that refreshing point of view, which I think we all like want to be refreshed. Help us be more refreshing in your view.
Help you be more refreshing than you are already.
Yeah, just you know, it's like, what do we go out? It's like I feel the stress like it's worse, right?
Sure.
I think it was better 10 years ago.
In some ways, I would agree.
So
Yeah.
what do we do? Like, how do we like figure out why it's getting worse and do something about it?
Well, my wife's a therapist. She's not here, so I can't completely answer that. I think some of it has to do with neurosis and psychosis. I'll just talk. I'm at my basic level, when you strip away everything, I'm just a middle school teacher. That's how I started my career. And so written books, done the scholar thing, but I'm just a school teacher. And what I try to teach my students now, and I don't get to do that often because I'm a dean, so I do mostly administrative work. I do mostly administrative work, but then I do. So what I often tell my students is, here's what I want from my students, no matter what I teach. The ability to critique every idea, to have compassion for individuals, all individuals, and to build community above all. I think the genius of King is not just the genius of Martin Luther King, it's also an idea he really borrows from Hegel, where you start with an idea called thesis, and then you say, well, what's the counterpoint of view? Antithesis. And then you search for synthesis. And to me, the deep heart level of searching for synthesis is saying, more than anything else, we need community. I think it's ridiculous when you see people talk about, well, race and region shouldn't matter. No, they should matter. But they should matter significantly, not ultimately. It's significant, our backgrounds, but it's not ultimate. And as long as we start to confuse those two, and as long as we say that we cannot maintain the capacity to critique those from our camp and have compassion for those who are not from our camp and build community, we're going to continue to be in trouble. I mean, listen, let's real quickly, let's talk about like this whole notion of having compassion. So, and building community and critiquing. So what I often tell my students, these are new glasses, and my wife says I can't take them off because I lose them. And these are the most I've ever spent on glasses. But I really try not to listen too much because I'm a grown man. That doesn't really work here because guys know I didn't say that to her, right? Think about this, for example. I'll tell my students, if you cannot critique, if you cannot cultivate, because we're in university, if you cannot cultivate the ability to critique people from your camp, listen, political, religious, or racial, if you cannot cultivate that capacity, then you're not a thinker. Everybody with me? But if you cannot potentially have compassion for people outside of your camp, then you're not really experiencing what it means to be human. I deliberately pick friends over the past 30 years of my life who don't look like me and who don't think like me. Not because I'm trying to do an arbitrary experience in a perverted form of affirmative action, but because I believe that is the heart of national community out of the many one. That is certainly the heart of what we see in Christian community, the cross that cuts across everything. So, I mean, that's like a long-winded answer, but you ask the professor, that's what we do. We give long-winded answers.
Let's see, two-part question. General Davis, Benjamin Davis, I guess most of his career was segregated U.S. Army. And then you mentioned Patton, integrated troops. When officially was the Army integrated? And since that time, I think we all see, movies that depict the Vietnam War with, injustices, and certain things. But where do you see the Army now?
Yeah, so one of my regrets, because of the kind of man my father was, one of my regrets was I didn't serve. So roughly 1948 is when Truman signs the desegregation order of the armed forces. However, as you know, it's one thing to pass a law. It's another thing to change culture. The biggest irony in Martin Luther King's work and thinking is that he didn't believe that you could legislate morality. Let that sink in for a minute. The man who ends up leading and pushing Lyndon Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 did not believe you could legislate morality. But that's still something that we should do. It's short of somebody being radically converted, that's what we should do. I think when we talk about the armed services now, we have to constantly think about, what are we doing again that sort of minimizes the importance of community and camaraderie, right? And what are we doing that elevates difference? And so again, I don't want to be too abstract here. That's why I really struggle with the contrast between the significance of my background versus my background being ultimate. There has to be something, that's what I mean by allegiance. There has to be something larger than just my background, just my race or my region or my religion, if we experience true community. And the really cool thing about the Army historically is, I've said that the founding documents have promises that we do not always fully apply. Certainly historically, we haven't applied it, but that's true of the Army as well. That Army was that entry level point. That Army was that the military was that testing ground for Blacks who had been slaves. I mean, consider this. Out of the 181 Blacks who served during the Civil War, at least 125 to 130 were escaped slaves. The desertion rate, both during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War for Blacks was lower, which meant the retention rate was higher on average than for whites. Well, why? Because they had been to the hell of slavery, and there was no way but up. So I think I always get excited about the possibilities. I'm not Pollyannish. I can speak a long time about the harsh realities. I often do with my students. But what I ask my students to always think about is, in the midst of a harsh reality, where is the potential or the promise for not just something better, but the right kind of relationship? So I think we're doing better. And can I say one more thing? So you guys are being so polite. You'll get to know me and you'll get to say, nah, David, you said enough. What I get really excited about or get really annoyed about, so let me tell you what I get annoyed about, is you'll have people, and they might be of a particular political perspective, who will say things are not getting better even incrementally. Well, that's nonsense. And you have some people way on the other side who say, well, things are not that bad. That's equally nonsense. I get annoyed sometimes. I tell my students, if I could imagine, because my daddy wasn't like this, someone who went through, an African-American who went through the throes, the slings and arrows of segregation, who would say, as bad as that was, that's as bad as slavery. No. And I get equally annoyed now by anyone who says that no matter how horrible racism still is, and it is, no matter how many moments we have of absolutely horrific racism that resembles, listen, what happened in segregation. For me as an African-American now, to compare my experience to those who experienced segregation de facto and de jure, that's just an insult to their experience. I am a dean at a school that my father could not have attended. And that's not even the best of the story of the Black American experience. So my answer to your question was even more long-winded than my answer to that question.
I know your wife, Veronica.
You do?
We worked together at Agape when she was there. I think the world of her. She's a wonderful human. So you get bonus points for her, for being connected to her. My question is about ways that we can understand reconciliation opportunities. There have been some really excellent books that have come out, and there have been some not so excellent books. Around the time of the Ferguson riots, there was a book that I read called Unoffendable that opened my eyes to an understanding of approaching relationships with people without offense. So what are some things that we can read to open our minds more, and what are some things that we can do? What are some action items that white people can do to build reconciliation with the African American community?
Yeah, that's a big question. So that would take about an hour, but so I'm gonna try to give I'm gonna give about a short version. So historically, I think it's really interesting to look at, this is where I would start historic. I mean, it depends on how much time you have. How many years do you have? So if you're talking about the long haul, what I consider to be the most important thing, context, I tell my students, they can look up something on social media, but they don't have a sense of context, experientially or historically. So what I find very interesting for people on the high intellectual side, and I'll get to the basic side in a second, is for you to take a look at, start reading how African Americans engaged the founding documents at different moments. How did they look at the founding documents through the Revolutionary War? How did that understanding or search for the potential improvement of those documents change during the Civil War, and so on and so forth? You see what I'm saying? So figuring out the evolution of how African Americans looked at our founding document, that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is I'm suspicious of books that talk about reconciliation without repentance, or repentance without reconciliation. So can I be really blunt? You might not want me to invite me back after this, brother. This is, everything I'm telling you is my opinion pretty much, except the facts I gave you. So this is going to be totally my opinion. I'm not meaning to offend anyone. I compare our current culture, and it's been this way for a long time. I don't think about the in-between. I think about the far right and the far left. So if we were, racial reconciliation were a trip that we were taking, those family trips you used to take across country, right? And the far right and far left are children, because they kind of are. Not right or left or necessarily children, far left or far, can I get a witness, right? And, they're children. So far left, far right, they're sitting in the back, right? If it was a road trip, if reconciliation were a road trip, the far right would say something like, are we there yet? As if relationships are not developmental. Listen, you talked about Veronica. When we got married, it's 1987, I was 25, when we get in trouble, this is being recorded. She was 22. I was pretty smooth and debonair, right? If I can say so myself. I mean, I know you're supposed to be modest, especially here down south, but a brother was smooth, right? Do you think now that my wife is in her late 50s, I can use the exact same approach to our relationship that I did when I was much younger? But somehow people, when they talk about racial relationships, they want to be one and done. Doesn't work like that. So the far right will say, are we there yet? I mean, we gave y'all this and we gave y'all that and blah, blah, blah. And then the far left says, to me, this is even more frightening. We'll never get there. More frightening than the assumption that somehow racial reconciliation has an ending point. To me, much more detrimental is the notion that we'll never get there. And that's what you're seeing in the far left. So I lean into reconciliation that travels from repentance. And repentance may be too strong a word for y'all, but how many times, husbands, you can either say amen or you can nod. How many times have you said you're sorry to your wife over the years? When you think you didn't do anything, right? So I mean, I think there has to be an openness there, but you can't have on the other side of this equation with black and white. It's problematic when you have people of color who will say stuff like, I've heard over the years, I know I have to end, say stuff like, I can never have a white friend. I can only have a white associate, no matter what. Gotta tell you, at 61, that's disturbing. I'm going to stop there, but we can develop a bibliography for you or anyone who's interested. Other thing I would like to say is you guys missed a golden opportunity. I just said I was 61. Your collective response should have been, you don't look that old. All right, thank you.
we're gonna have to fix this microphone before you do come back next, David. I have a gift I'd like to give you. One, thank you for being here. That was a message that I think we all need to hear. In this Black History Month, it is a privilege to have you here and for you to share it with us. You might have lost your bonus points because I don't think you knew that we had somebody in the audience that knew Veronica before you started talking about how you were going to talk to her. Yeah, you would have totally gone with a whole different setup. We have a gift that we'd like to give you. It's a pen. And it has our club's name on it, and we ask that you keep it and that you remember your time with us with this pen. But the first thing that we would like for you to do with that pen would be to sign this book that we read to a local elementary school here in the Brentwood community. So, David, thank you for being.
All right, so when I sign, does that have to be legend?
Yes, well, no, actually it doesn't. It just depends on whoever's reading the book, if they'll be able to tell who you were or not. David, thank you for being here. That really was excellent. I would like to re-welcome our guests. Chris, thank you for being here. Robin, thank you for coming back. Bob, great to see you. And Pat, thank you for your interest in our club, and we look forward to spending more time with you on a more permanent basis. Larry Faust, welcome back. Glad you're here. If you can, please help put away tables and chairs in stacks of 8 by the table. Tables will go into the closet back here. If there's nothing else for the good of Rotary, then we are adjourned.